Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Med City Pivot Podcast. I'm Katie Adams, an assistant editor at Med City News, which covers innovation in the healthcare industry. And today we have a very special episode sponsored by Zealous, which is streamlining healthcare payments and communication with one single digital solution that enables payments to move more efficiently and effectively. And in just a moment, I'll be speaking with Yusuf Qasim, who is Zealous's president of payment, about how a better healthcare payment experience can transform and foster better payer-provider relationships. We know that there can often be a somewhat adversarial relationship between payers and providers, especially now with everything going on with, increased denials and changing reimbursement rates. So I'm really excited to talk to one of these tech players that's kind of acting as a middleman to repair these relationships because they need to be facilitated. There's no having healthcare without payer provider relationships. So I think we'll just get into it. Yusuf, thank you so much for being on the show today. Welcome.
Thank you, Katie. Really appreciate you having me here today. Really looking forward to this topic as well.
So I know that Zealous is a big focus of your tech platform is simplifying the business of healthcare. So I'm wondering if we could just level set by talking about some of the biggest inefficiencies or the biggest opportunities in the healthcare payment process right now.
Yeah, I think we often in the tech world use a lot of buzzwords. Some of those buzzwords in terms of how we look at some of the inefficiencies as well as the opportunities in healthcare payments right now is there is still a ton of fragmentation. And I think when you have a lot of fragmentation, you have a lot of friction within the system, and that friction includes a lot of manual reactive workflows, systems just really disconnected or really no source of truth, and then ultimately really a lack of data insights or transparency in the system. And I think you said something earlier around adversarial relationships, friction. These are things that just shouldn't exist if the system, if the platform, if the workflows are really built correctly from the first time. And so I think healthcare is going through a renaissance. That renaissance is more and more folks, whether you're at the payer side or the provider side, believe it or not, everyone is trying to invest a lot of their time, effort, energy in terms of really breaking through the glass, and once and for all fixing the system the way it should have been fixed 10, 20, 30 years ago. And so I think putting that into words in terms of what we feel exists within payers and providers right now is number one. I'm going to focus on the provider first and foremost because I think they're getting the brunt of this. They are just overwhelmed by a patchwork of portals, logins, different point solutions that they have to use to reconcile payments. And, they are in some ways either using legacy technology or what we like to call legacy or free EFT, that really just is coming with a lot of what I call back end cost implications, especially at a time when there's staffing shortages. I think from the payer side, believe it or not, they do want to deliver payments quickly and seamlessly. Payers were not really designed to be banks or fintech, but they're also dealing with 10, 20, 30-year-old technology, literally sometimes DOS frameworks that are being designed to use and move money faster and quicker. And so what that means for them is they're getting inundated with a ton of calls, a ton of inquiries. They have to also support a lot of this and have to chase down a lot of sort of where the data or the claims are at. And no one's really happy with this process. No one's really happy with sort of what the current or the end state is right now. And so everyone's sort of leaning in terms of how do they make themselves more efficient? How do they start to make themselves more seamless? So that way there is just trust in the system because no one wins when something is fundamentally broken.
Yeah, you talked a lot about just how complex the healthcare payment systems are and all the processes we use to, you know, make sure we get reimbursement and that we're paid for the services we provide. Can you talk, there's because of that, there's a lot of, tech out there to facilitate these processes, and there's a lot of healthcare payment technology companies. So I would love for you to talk about what makes Zealous' platform different than, the other platforms out there.
Yeah, so we've been on this journey for over 15 years. It's been a long, exciting journey. I think when I started in healthcare payments, I was like, "Oh, this thing should be easy to solve." Every other industry has solved for it, even 15 years ago, and here I am, 15 years later, trying to keep pushing the envelope and trying to bring more innovation. Because there's either a lack of adoption in terms of the technology or the tech, There's a lack of expertise that exists in terms of understanding sort of the nuances of healthcare. But when we started to build out Zealous, and now we call it the ZAP, or the Zealous Advanced Payment Platform, we really decided to kind of build a set of new standards and not really digitize the old one. There's a lot of easy ways to say we're going to take an old process and you're going to kind of fast forward it. You're going to use workarounds or manual sort of band-aids to fix a problem. But we were like, screw that. We actually want to start to build things from the ground up and build it right. And so what that really meant for us is we really wanted to reimagine what healthcare payments could be, if you were to build it from the ground up. And we took both a payer lens as well as a provider lens. And so for us, really on the front end of this, because we service both payers and providers, from a payer side, we said we want to take off all that burden from you. We recognize you may not be able to advance or modernize all your systems, but if you provided Zealous with that raw data, with the raw data of healthcare, not these standard transactions, we could ingest it, we could normalize it, and we could build it for scale so that the end recipients, aka providers, could actually use it in a meaningful way. And so because we sit at the precipice of actually payers being able to offload their data and their dollars and allow Zealous to facilitate it, what that really means is we can bring in a system of choice. We can bring a system of end-to-end, like various modalities of offerings. And what we do with the providers is saying, we want to make sure we get the data and dollars wherever it needs to go. So we've really taken, I'd say, basic standards in healthcare and said, we really want to elevate it above and beyond, because a lot of those standards, believe it or not, are not usable. In many teams, when we talk to providers, they're saying, I'm getting a digital 835, or I'm getting a digital payment, but then I have so-and-so or this process to actually make sense of what that payment is at a claim live level. Like, that should not happen. When you actually have payments and transactions flowing electronically to an endpoint, there should be little to no human intervention. And sadly, there still is today, because of the disparate amounts of data, disparate amount of inconsistency. And Zealous, we can sort of sit at the eco center and start to build that. In addition to that, we're sort of trying to bring clarity in this complexity. And so when you receive payments and data together, you can also start to get insights. You can start to get analytics. And I know we're going to get to that topic in a little bit. But, when you have that central source of truth, you can start to build and elevate the overall experience for a provider or a practice. And I think that is sort of end state going to be one of the most powerful unlocks as we kind of get into this next era of this renaissance, because, we want to check the box in terms of digitization, but we want to say, like, what's the so what now? Like, what are we going to do with this? How do we make, providers more powerful with their data? How do we make sure things are flowing through the system, quickly and efficiently? And so these are just some of the things that we do. But at the center, because we get to move this data and process it, we can really delight our customers and really start to take off the burden and having to do it on their own or adapt another system, because we think platforms will win. Point solutions don't really win. They solve a point in time solution, and platforms can really kind of bring a holistic solution as well as additional insights and analytics along the way.
Awesome. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about, what it looks like for a provider to use this solution and the outcomes that they see as a result, because I want to highlight a bit of an award Zealous earned this summer, which is the KLS Point of Light designation. This is actually a designation I follow every year. As I understand the Point of Light designation, it's they highlight KLS highlights good, strong examples of, positive provider payer relationships, because those are, a little rare, and we want to prove that those are possible and that good tech can heal those types of relationships. And it often, when I read KLS Point of Light reports, it revolves around a central piece of technology that kind of bridges the gap between the payer and provider. So if you could talk a little bit about this recent designation that Zealous earned in June, and why it was a bit of a bright spot, I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, I mean, case in points of light. I think, in this example, first, we're really appreciative of class recognizing Zealous in this journey, and some of the payers and providers that we were able to do and demonstrate this with. To your point, it is rare, but at Zealous, we're on a mission to not make it rare and make it the norm, because we firmly believe that you can bring light into the system. And there are so many positive benefits when everyone starts to break down these fictitious barriers and really kind of work across. Everybody wins. And this was one that we are so, so proud of at Zealous. And so what this really meant was, two things. We had a recent Arizona-based IDN that really looked to Zealous to streamline processes. And I'd say 2 years ago, we would have had two different teams. Our payer team probably talked to the payer side of the house, and the provider team talked to the provider side of the house, and they actually wouldn't actually talk together, which is really what happens a lot in the system today, separate from Zealous. And so we brought all the stakeholders to the table. We looked at their data and really started to use our expertise to saying, here's actually what's happening in your system, and here are all the things that are breaking down along the way. Again, no fault to either side. It's just the reality of where they were at in their technology journey. And so problem number one was they still were heavily relying on check-based payments. But the reason why was they had, or the provider side had, the ability to receive payments electronically. But when they tried, it actually didn't help their process. It slowed it down. To be able to sit in 2025 and say, paying me electronically, is actually not helping me in the system is problem number one. And this comes back to the legacy EFT or what I'd call basic EFTs or ACH offerings don't necessarily solve all the problems. And so when we came to the table, we said, hey, we could actually digitize over 80 to 90% of all of your payments. And in addition to that, we now understand all the different practice management systems and EMRs that you're utilizing to making sure we can get the data downstream. And so we brought Zap at the forefront for both sides of this integrated delivery network. And so ultimately the result was we were able to digitize over $500 million in payments, cutting those processing times from 2 months down to 2 days. So not only were we able to double the volume of electronic payments, we're actually able to actually streamline and get all their backend processing, all their backend reconciliation done without any human intervention. So this ultimately resulted in a massive amount of savings for both sides of the system. We removed and diminished a ton of waste, inefficiency, and administrative burden. And really, ultimately, what that meant was there was significant amount of collaboration that was happening across, and everybody was happy. There was less inquiries on the front end of like where my payment is or how fast I'm going to get paid. There was a ton more automation introduced into the system for the actual health system. And this is like a perfect example of how things should work in the system. You brought the right stakeholders. We had full visibility in terms of where processes were getting broken down. And ultimately, everybody won. It really, like, everybody was so thrilled with how seamless this process worked. And they leveraged Zap at the core of this platform or this intersection to kind of solve it all for them. And so it was obviously brought more security, it brought more trust, and it brought a lot more accuracy as it relates to payment processing for both the health plan as well as the health system.
I'm wondering if Zealous's approach is any different, when it's working with a health plan versus a provider, or if their pain points are maybe, a little more similar than we think, or if Zealous really has to kind of switch up the way that it approaches partnerships with these two different players.
Yeah, I think it's I would say we've definitely been switching it up. We often, again, back to the silos, when we are talking solely with a payer, they're really in many ways looking at it at I would say, a myopic view. It's just they only have so much purview into how they need to solve the system on their own. And similarly, providers, they're using a lot of systems along the way to solve their problem. And for us, we took a big step back because we sit in the middle, because we look at both payers and providers as our clients, and we have scale representation from both sides. We often can start to bring a lot of the commonalities or themes to the table. And in many of those instances, you mentioned, Katie, earlier around denials, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but for us, we were like, hey, if we could bring visibility for providers and saying, here's where your biggest pain points are for a lot of our payers, would that be value? And they're like, absolutely. We then similarly, leverage our payer clients and said, hey, this is a big theme. We know it's a big friction pain point for you, and we know you're not intentionally doing this, but if we provided these analytics, what would the value be for you? And they started to rattle off a ton of values. They'd get less calls, they'd have happier provider relationships. They also measure their NPS. And so it's ironic when you start to be provocative and walk through these use cases or examples where someone's like, I didn't know that was even possible. People really lean in. And I think that class and bringing that collaboration to the table was one example. But absolutely, I think there are a lot of similar problems, and at the end of the day, a lot of our payers and providers have like similar common goals. They want to be more efficient. They want to deliver value. They want 100% transparency in the system, and they want things flowing pretty seamlessly because you know that's the nirvana state for the healthcare system. We're as consumers of healthcare, all users of healthcare, and I think even when we have to experience that, we want the system to flow successfully as well. And so, at the end of the day, I think everyone wants to lean in on that. They just need the right technology partners and the right expertise to be able to drive forward the ball.
Well, we're talking a lot about, technology, and healthcare is undergoing, big digital revolution and really modernizing its tech. And it's drawing a lot of different concerns and attitudes across the industry. So I want to talk a little bit about the risk of over automation when it comes to an area sensitive as healthcare finance. How does a company like Zella's balance efficiency and implementing this tech to achieve better outcomes with trust and ethics and some of the things that a lot of doctors and consumers, patients are worried about?
Yeah, I mean, this is a hot topic right now, both within healthcare and obviously outside of healthcare with, the introduction of AI, which we're really excited about. And I think, ethical automation or the use of it isn't just about speed. I think with everything that you do, whether it's automation, whether it's AI or just normal standard business, product offerings, it's about accountability, security, and patient safety. I think, in healthcare finance, where decisions directly impact patient care, obviously provider sustainability, payer integrity, you know, over rotating on any one of these themes or new things could introduce massive risk or errors in the system. And I think that's where you really need to really sort of lean in. And I think having deep, healthcare expertise coupled with technology allows you to sort of think through that first and not just necessarily over rotate on the technology aspect. And so for us at Zealous, we firmly believe that humans need to be part of every one of these decision trees. You can't just, solely rely on technology to do it. These are both two of the most regulated industries, both healthcare as well as financial services. And so you can't just rely on one on the own, but you really need to start to use technology to kind of give humans the right time to spend more time on sort of the more complex tasks. And so oftentimes, like, we look at these sort of hand in hand and in concert, but I think whether it's self-regulation, there's a lot of progress happening from a regulatory dynamic, but I think it ultimately comes back to making sure you are accountable for every decision that you make, for every technology that you want to introduce or implement, with always a lens towards security as well as safety.
Excellent. Well, we don't have too much time left, but I want to talk a little bit more about the feedback that Zealous gets from its customers, both on the payer and provider side, which I know we talked about a little bit with the class report, but I'm wondering, what customers are saying.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to start with the providers first because they're near and dear to me. They're really praising Zealous for cutting payment posting time, improving cash flow, and reducing staff burnout. Now, every day I do get a lot of emails in terms of what's happening, what's going on, and I try to keep the pulse of the customer at mind. And I'd say, like, for us, there are so many times. Last year there was obviously the cyber attack on Change Healthcare, which Zealous was not implicated, but in that moment we were able to step up and get a significant amount of, I'd say, the U.S. healthcare system back up and running again through our technology and platform. There were a myriad of emails that were coming in and actually thanking us for being able to get payments out the door. And they were all forms of payment. They were check payments at the time because we just didn't have a choice. And they were digital payments that we were able to get up and running. I think some of the other things is we're bringing a lot of security into the system. So we didn't talk a lot about that today, but obviously fraud monitoring and joining the Zealous payment platform, we can sort of leverage a lot of our data to prevent fraud in the system as well. And many times we're catching things that providers or other payment platforms could not catch. And so bringing more security and trust into the system is something that, we get a lot of great feedback for our customers. And a lot of our customers want us to do more. Today we only represent roughly 550 payers in the healthcare system. And oftentimes providers are saying, I love for Zealous to do this across my entire book of business. And don't worry, we're working on it. We're coming. But for us is how do we continue to drive more value across the system, not just with the payers that we represent today. And that is our next evolution and journey. But for us, making sure that our provider NPS is high, making sure our onboarding, our tools, our portals, our platforms are easy to use. And in many cases, they don't need to use them because they're automated and they're actually streamlined. And so these are some of the things that just we hear from our provider customers. Kind of flipping it on the payer side is I talked about it earlier. Payers are not to be designed to be banks or fintechs, and so for them, they are really happy that they can trust a scale platform that is driving compliance and reducing a lot of that complexity, and then making sure that we're making it easy for them to actually leverage our platform. So this is obviously further reinforced by the Class Points of Light Award. In 2024, we were awarded the MedTech Breakthrough Award for Best Overall Healthcare Payments Innovation. We have a insane NPS for the good side, and that outranks our competition. We are driving over 120% client retention rate, and our average customer has worked with Zealous for over 13 years. So we are doing a lot of things right. We want to continue to keep doing things better. We want to continue to drive more innovation. But at the heart, always looking for feedback for our customers because that's what drives where we go next and how we continue to chip away at driving more modernization within the healthcare financial system.
Yeah, you mentioned a few times during our conversation how much Zealous really, sits in the middle. And it seems to me that it really sits at the intersection of so many things of claims, payments, transparency. So I really appreciated during our conversation learning more about how you keep all those systems connected and agile in an industry that can be so fragmented and complex. So thank you for all the insight, but that is all the time we have. Yusuf, thank you for being such a great guest today.
Awesome. Again, Kate, thank you for having me. This is obviously a topic that I'm super passionate about. Could talk for hours, but appreciate everybody listening in and hope we can chat soon again.
Excellent. Well, thank you and have a good day.
You too.